Hello everybody and welcome to Asp.net. I'm going to be recording a series of videos for this course to help you work through the materials. Some of the materials can be challenging at times, especially given the situation where we have a book that's written with an older version of Visual Studio than the version of Visual Studio that I recommend that you actually use. So let's start by actually taking a real quick look through the unit folder here. In Unit 1, there's a couple of tasks that you need to complete. Well, most notably is the homework assignment. And that homework assignment requires that you have your software already installed. So if you don't have your software already installed, you'll probably be interested in figuring out how to do that, what version to get. And I've been getting a lot of questions on it, so I decided to kind of preemptively go backwards and record this video and add it in to the course shell. It doesn't appear on my screen right now, but after it's completed, it will be added. One thing that I think that's really important to do, aside from getting the textbook, is to actually jump over to the resources page of our course shell. So I'm going to jump over there right now, and I just want to point out a couple of really important little things here. The first thing is the fact that we have this PDF version of the textbook available here. And that's not to keep you from buying the physical copy. I still recommend that you buy the physical copy and then use this as an auxiliary method when working on screen. And the reason it can be helpful is, especially if you're working in a dual screen environment, having the book on one screen and then having your coding environment on the other, you can actually, in some cases, just copy-paste code fragments from the PDF into your project and get things to work. And it can help speed the process along. Some people like the visceral feeling of typing everything in, and that's fine too. There's no real right or wrong. Additionally, I provided the code files from the author right here. So you could actually download all the code from the book to your machine, unzip it, and have it ready to copy-paste in. That is not necessarily always going to make things work because of version differences. You do find that sometimes you put things in and things are slightly different, but I talk about those things in the video. So another thing that I recommend real strongly is that you watch the videos each week to make sure that you're doing things in a way that works out for the versions that we're using. Now, the official version of the software that we are going to use, I'm going to jump back over to Unit 1 here to show you that, is going to be Visual Studio 2017. And that's the version I'm going to use to record all the videos. I do have a series of videos already recorded from last year and actually maybe even from previous years embedded in this course shell. And when I do that, I will have these little indicators here indicating when it was recorded and what version of Visual Studio. Now, some of you might already have Visual Studio 2015 or 2013 or 2012 installed, and you can use any one of those versions. And for the most part, the instructions for those three versions will be fairly similar, just given the menu differences and the project template differences. 2017, though, does significantly change the appearance of some of the screens, both for doing installations and then also for choosing project templates as you're working. And that has confused people, and that's, once again, one of the reasons I'm recording this. Now, Visual Studio 2017 is available for free. That's not the way it used to be, but it is available for free these days via the Community Edition. If you go to this first link that I have here, visualstudio.com, you'll see that there's a collection of links here for downloading Visual Studio. Now, the professional and enterprise versions, if you download them from Microsoft, Microsoft will give you a trial period and then they will ask you to pay for it. And that's not what you want to do. The Community Edition is completely free and it will always be free. It's a new thing that Microsoft is doing and I think it's a great idea. It's basically the equivalent of the professional version with a couple of extra little team tools that are built in that, at least for our situation now, is not necessary. And I know plenty of professionals that just stick with the community version anyhow. Why pay money if you don't have to? If you do want to go with the professional or enterprise versions, you can get those through a little program that we have arranged at Gateway called Microsoft Dreamspark. It used to be called Microsoft Imagine. If you follow this link, gtconthehub.com, it'll take you to the page where you can sign in. The first time you go to sign in, you actually have to create an account. If you've never done this before, you will need to register. And you use your student email address, and it is preset in the system to recognize that you are a Gateway student and are authorized to get to the software. Once you are signed in, and actually I'm being kind of brave here because I haven't even tried it yet this semester, so hopefully it works. Okay, and I'm in. And then you can just come up here and you can start typing your search criteria. In our case, it would be Visual Studio. And then you can look at the versions that are available. Now, if you are downloading here from Dreamspark, you probably want to just go ahead with the Enterprise version. The Enterprise version would be the same thing that large professional companies would buy for their environments. And the reason for that is it has a lot of tools built in for versioning software, for working in team environments, working in shared or cloud storage situations. And on top of it all, it provides every possible tool that you could ever want in the product. I will caution you, though, when you do full installs of these products, you're sometimes looking at upwards of like 60 gigs of disk space minimum to get it installed. So for a lot of people, that's too much. You can also get the Community Edition right here from this environment as well, and that's up to you which one that you choose. So I won't say any more about that, but it used to be that you could get every version that ever existed here, but it looks like they've capped it now. So they don't actually go back beyond, looking to me, version 2015. I don't see that they have anything older than that. Now, our book is written in 2012, so that's where we get a little bit of a conundrum. 2013 and 2012 were very, very similar products. They both were released in combination with Windows 8 and 8.1, and 2015 was released in combination with Windows 10. 2017 was released in combination with Windows 10 Creator Edition, so they always kind of match up with whatever version of Windows is out there. Once again, I would recommend the Community Edition overall. I think it's the best combination of performance and features, easiest to download and work with. Now, if you go ahead and you do the download, which I know many of you have done and tried, I'm going to actually bring up the Visual Studio installer package here on my machine so you can see what choices you should make when you're installing so that you get all the tools that you need. And that's, I think, one spot where I've seen a lot of problems with people trying to install this. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click my Modify button here. And what that should do is bring up the same screen that you guys get when you do the install with the regular installer. So if you want a quick summary way of how to get this information, just look at the items that I have installed here on the right-hand side. And if you choose these items, you should be fine. Now, I have a couple of extra things that I've thrown in because of some of the work that I do, and that's kind of a subjective thing. If you have an ample amount of disk space and you really want to explore it all, I mean, you can check every box and grab it all. But if you want to look at it from a screen standpoint, you definitely want all the items that are checked. So at least these three. We will use Node.js development. Azure will be useful if you're in the SharePoint track, so you could grab that, but it's not necessary for this class. You also want to add the data storage and processing. Once again, Office and SharePoint development, that would be more for the SharePoint people. I'm not choosing anything for mobile and gaming. Those libraries are quite large and add quite a bit to the download. But one that's really important and people are missing is way at the bottom, and that is this .NET Core cross-platform. You can see some of the technologies contained here are the ones that we are going to be using to build basically universal web applications. So that one you definitely want. Now, since I already have all these things installed, clearly I'm not going to hit any buttons and install anything, but I just want to help with guiding you to do your own thing. The other thing I want to mention is people that are Mac users. I've had a couple of people install it on the Mac, very enthusiastic, and I'm one of those people as well, but I haven't tried it on my Mac yet. But I've learned from those students that the project templates that you need will just simply not be found in the Mac version. They are focusing more on creating apps for mobile devices and for web that don't use the same technologies that we're going to be teaching, which is unfortunate. I was kind of having high hopes for it. I do plan on playing with it a little bit over the coming weeks, and if I figure something out, I will let you know. Now, if you are in that situation, then you're going to be stuck using a different approach. One of the approaches you can use is what we call our VDI. A VDI is a virtual desktop environment that allows you to connect to a full Windows environment that we run on servers at Gateway that contain Visual Studio running inside that environment. I will tell you that currently that Visual Studio is set to version 2013. So I am putting in a support ticket with our department to raise that up to version 2017, hopefully in the very near future. The other thing that you should know is if you're a Mac user, you could always run a virtual machine that runs Windows and then install Visual Studio inside that environment. And in fact, a couple of my students prefer to do that approach. Although I do know a few Mac users that also dual boot their machines into Windows, and that's a fine approach too. The virtualization software that you use is really up to you. I've always been a big fan of using VirtualBox myself because it's a free product made by Oracle. But there are other pieces of software that you can pay for, but I really don't find them any superior to VirtualBox. Okay, given that we've kind of talked about those issues, I do now want to jump back over to the unit folder and make sure that you guys are geared up to do Chapter 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull Chapter 1 up on my screen, which I have right here. And I'm going to step through the chapter, kind of giving you a little bit of explanation about the chapter, and hopefully this will help to guide you. Okay. Well, the first thing you're going to notice is they immediately start talking about the history of .NET and all the tools, and I know that some of this might repeat from the previous video, and I apologize for that, but I just want people to be clear on the content here. So in the old days, Visual Studio would come in a couple different versions, just like we saw, but actually even more flavors. And what they would do for people, because the product was not free, is they came up with what they called an express version, which is often distributed with books of this nature. Sometimes you would buy these books and the CD would be right in the back and you could install the product directly. That version is still available. I understand if you want these versions, now you have to go to Microsoft directly and hunt for them. And you know, I probably will get a couple of students that want to match up exactly with the book and will go find this product and install it. I don't recommend that because we're looking at this point in time that's already 4 versions old, and that's really old for a major IDE. So I recommend that you do stick with 2017. The whole concept of working with these technologies really kind of stems back to an old scripting language called ASP. And ASP was very similar to languages like PHP, where you could intermingle it with your HTML, and then it would run server-side and generate your HTML to your screen. That technology is still active on some old legacy pages, and there's some aspects of it that we will see within the coding that we do, but our focus for doing most of the scripting is using modern ASP tags, which we will learn, and then using the C# code behind it, a real programming language to power it, which is a really powerful combination. All right, I'm not going to give you a lot more of the history of these products because I think I did that pretty well in the previous video. We already discussed where you can get Visual Studio, so I would basically ask you to summarily kind of skip over these sections. So you don't really need to install the Express version, so even though this technically is one of your assignments, installing this version is not necessary. Install the 2017 version and then give me screenshots of that for your homework submission. I don't need a whole bunch of them, just one that shows me that Visual Studio 2017 is up on your screen and running. And you know, since we're on that topic, why don't I go ahead and launch Visual Studio and show you an effective way to do screenshots. So I have the product up and running on my screen. One way you could show to me that it is installed. It's just very simply bringing up the Windows Snipping Tool. I already have it open, but I want to show you how to launch it. If you go to your Start menu, any version of Windows from Windows XP on up, you can type SNI, and as soon as you start typing, it'll narrow down the search and bring up the tool. Now it is the snipping tool. It comes up with a little interface like this. I'm running Windows 10 Creator Edition with an update, so some of you might not see this mode button, but the other buttons will be there. And the ones that are really key, are basically this one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click New, and you can see my pointer changes to a crosshair, and then I can just come in here and just select the part of the screen I want to grab. Now, you notice I didn't even grab the whole screen because really it's not necessary. There's nothing much off to the right, not a lot at the bottom. And it shows me that the product is indeed installed. All right. Now, once I have that, I would create myself a Word document, and you can use any, editor you'd like. And I'm just going to create a blank document. You could say Unit 1 homework. And then you come back over to this product, and you could save this and then insert the file, but what I like doing is after I do the snip is I just hit the copy button and then just jump right over to Word and paste, and there it is. One problem I do see with people, if they're not familiar with the snipping tool, is often they'll use the print screen button, which does work, but it captures the whole screen, and it can create screenshots that are very, very large in size. And one of the really good things to do with screenshots is to try to make them efficient. So if you were, let's say, really just trying to highlight some code in a small area, there's no reason to capture the whole screen. You just get the snipping tool, you just grab the piece that you need. And then it also makes the screenshots easier for me to read, the teacher who's giving you your grade, so it makes me a little happier on top of it. It's not a bad idea to also indicate, some comments as you're moving along, indicating what your successes and failures were. And if you do have issues, this is a great place to kind of, indicate them. Say, hey, I had a real problem with this, and this is what I did, and this is how I fixed it. And I like to read those because it kind of keeps me informed on your progress. All right, so I'm sure you can figure out the rest of that in terms of creating screenshots and uploading them, but I just wanted to really quickly demonstrate that. All right, so once you have all that stuff installed, then you get to this next try it out exercise where you're going to create your first Asp.NET website. We're not really doing anything fancy here aside from getting to the point where we're going to create a quick little project, and I'm going to navigate you through the process of what template to select, because that's the spot where I think that because of version differences most people are getting stuck. Alright, so they want us to go ahead and start Visual Studio, follow all the instructions for registering it and all the different components. I'm making the assumption that you've already gone through that process. Okay? So let's go ahead and get ourselves launched once again. I guess I shouldn't have even closed it. And you get the start screen up on the page. So that would bring us up to step 3. If you wanted to screenshot at that point, it's kind of redundant because I think you've already done it in the previous step, but at least show me that you have it up and running. Then we're going to move on to the next step where we're going to actually create an empty ASP.NET website. So here I go, and I'm going to come up to the File menu and choose New. Now, one thing that you're going to notice between versions, Visual Studio 2017 excludes one menu item here, which would say New Website. And that's not present, obviously. And all we have is choices project or file. If you're using 2015, 2013, or 2012, you will select New Website at this point, because that is what will get you to the correct templates. Otherwise, you will not see them. Then you will get application templates as opposed to website templates. So I'm going to go ahead in Visual Studio 2017 and click Project. And then you can see that on the left-hand side, I went to the Visual C# section because that's our back-end language of choice. I then went to Web, and then expanded it and went to Website. And if you don't do that expansion, you are not going to see that choice. Okay, so that's a pretty key step. So going back over to the book, they then have you basically walk through the same type of things. But notice the blank website one is not the one we're going to select here. They actually want us to click Asp.NET Webforms Site, and they're doing that for a very particular reason. So I'm going to choose that second option. And I'm not going to worry about naming anything right now because this is really more demonstration. I know that if you do want to name it, I think they suggest that maybe you call it like Hello World or something like that. I'm not really very concerned about that at this point because this isn't really anything real. It's more like just try it. So whatever you call it is really fine. The other thing that I would caution you is where you store your files. If you watch the videos for Chapter 2, I go into file management and where you should put those things, and I think that you will find that really helpful. But for right now, I'm just kind of going with whatever it puts in here just to do it. All right, so I go ahead and click OK, and what's happening is it's collecting a bunch of different files and resources and pre-building a project for us. So it's going to build an entire framework of a website. Now, depending on the speed of your machine, this could take a while, especially if you've never done it before. My machine is an i7 with 16 gigs of RAM and an SSD, so it's going to run pretty quick compared to, if you had like an i3 or an AMD chip or something like that with less RAM. Now, once you're completely up and running, your screen might not look exactly like mine, but you should have a whole bunch of files that appear here in the Solution Explorer. Now, my main reason for doing this, and the book's main reason for doing this, is to show you what happens here when you work with these types of projects, especially when you choose a template that has a lot of pre-built components like this one. If you look on the right-hand side, I mean, there's a whole lot of assets here that are pre-built. A bunch of folders, a bunch of files, there's scripts, there's all these weird-looking files you probably have never seen before. And it also jumps us right into a bunch of code that might look partially familiar and partially not, because we have a combination of ASP.NET code and standard HTML. Now, what I'm going to do is, and I believe this is the next step in the book. I guess I've done this so many times I've kind of ignored the fact that we should be changing things. Well, I guess they want us to add a couple of things, so why don't we actually do that? It says open the default Aspx file, so let's go find that. If you look in the right-hand side here in the Solution Explorer, you'll find that file, and all you have to do is single-click it. Now, by coincidence, that also happened to already be open, because that is the default page. Notice not index.html, but default.aspx. Also notice capital D at the beginning. And these are Microsoft conventions that we're going to learn to follow. All right, the next instruction says open it, remove all the code inside the ASP content block. Okay, so let's do that. So ASP content block. Now, I'm noticing that there's a difference here already. Are you noticing it? Right, all this content. And I guess I wasn't noticing it. All right, I thought that they changed the name of it, but they didn't, thankfully. All right, so next thing we're going to do is we're just going to take some couple HTML snippets here and then drop them into that area. And you're going to notice that some standard HTML, heading type 2, and a paragraph, then just some plain old text. And then we get to this weird tag that is %. And this is actually what we call an ASP style tag. This is also an ASP tag. This is a more modern one, but these are the old school ones. And a lot of languages that run within HTML will often use these tags. So like, for example, if you were to learn how to code in JSP, which is a Java HTML language, you would use those same tags to insert that code. All right, now that we've done that, let's see what our next instruction is. They want us to go ahead and open the browser. Now, they gave you a shortcut key for doing it, but you can also just come up here and hit the play button at the top of the toolbar. Now, what's happening in the background as I hit that is Visual Studio is launching its own built-in web server. And that web server runs inside the product, so we don't have to install any software. It just does it. Now, notice that it kind of seems like it's not working, but if you look up here, you see that the wheel is still spinning, so it's still happening in the background. And so now that it's all done, you can see that it actually pre-built an application for me and dropped in the stuff that I put in. Now, I didn't create any of these other components. They are all pre-built by the template. But if you get this far, you've successfully completed this first little exercise, and then at that point, I would bring up your snipping tool and then just do a really quick capture. Maybe that's enough. You know, a lot of white space there. There's no point in doing that. And it shows me the timestamp. It shows me I've got the local host, which is the local web server. And I would call this little exercise successful at this point. All right, jumping back over to the book, let's see what our next task is. They go through the process of kind of explaining stuff. And they're also pointing out that the IIS Express web server is running. Now, given the different versions of Visual Studio, you're going to get different looking icons. So you can see that this icon pretty much mimics that one. And that is not a piece of software that you manually installed, but that is the one that's built into Visual Studio. When Visual Studio needs to display a web page that you're building using this technology, it has to use a web server. This stuff runs what we call server-side, and we'll explain that more as we go. But it requires a web server in order to launch it and look at it. All right, the author goes through some explanations about how the code works, and I encourage you to read that. And then they go through a very quick introduction on how the technology really works. Now, in a typical environment when we work with HTML, which you've already learned, you're working with files that are basically static. It doesn't matter what kind of machine you put them on, whether it's a server or a client. If you have the files on a computer and you have a web browser, you can open them up and take a look at the website. No server is necessary. Asp.NET is not that type of technology, though. Like PHP, which is a server-side technology, you require a web server. Whether you run that server locally on your machine or in a remote location, that server must take the code that's written in ASP, run the code, and then execute it to create the HTML that comes out as output. So that's really kind of an important concept. All right. So another thing that's kind of interesting is the fact that we are probably going to get a little smattering of relearning a little HTML and a little CSS and a little JavaScript. But I'm going to tell you, that's not the focus of this course. I assume that you're coming in knowing that stuff. If it has been a while, I would encourage you to go to the W3 Schools site, for example, and maybe review some of the tutorials there on the basics of HTML and HTML structure. There's a bunch of different tags that you should know in HTML, so hopefully these all look familiar. These are tags that need to be in every document, so the HTML tags, the head, the body, the title. And then some other common ones that you'll see that have been introduced in HTML5 with the header, section, and the side, and some other real common ones. And you should know all of these. If any of these are foreign to you, you better study up, because I just kind of make the assumption that you know these. So they should look familiar, and then you can see they have all the HTML5 tags. Further, if you start to dig in and go through the rule sets of HTML5, they go and kind of do an overview of them. Any element that's open must be closed, whether it's self-closing or not. But these two actually in HTML5 are optional. You don't have to self-close them. HTML5 knows how to self-close them. Now, when we work in Visual Studio, you might notice sometimes, depending on the doc type that you choose, that these closing slashes sometimes are included, and it's all about the doc type you choose. And I think that's pretty important. All right. I think you guys should know much of this stuff. The Doctype Declarations, for the most part, that we're going to use are standard HTML5. There might be a couple of exceptions if we're looking at old legacy technology. And for the most part, the tool, Visual Studio, will add this in for you, and it should be a piece of cake to work with. Now, where things become new is when we start working with these new ASP tags, and all of them will sit inside of brackets like HTML, but then will be prefaced with an ASP and a colon, and then an indicator of what type of element you're adding. Now, it's pretty easy to figure out that an ASP button is maybe a button. Absolutely. Is it much different than doing a traditional input button? No, but however, the difference is this is static HTML, this is dynamically generated ASP. Yes, the end result on the screen is the same thing, but this can be programmatically controlled, and this can be programmatically controlled, but not through ASP or C# code. It would be controlled through JavaScript. So there's reasons to pick one or the other. It just really kind of depends on the work you're doing. When you're working in the .NET environment and you start pulling buttons in and text fields in, typically you'll see ASP prefixes always. Now, for those of you that have not worked within Visual Studio before, the author goes through and kind of gives you some examples and a talk about the different items on the screen. Now, even though versions have changed, this part at least is the same, so I would ask you to kind of read through this and kind of start to familiarize yourself. As we work through the chapters, you guys are going to notice that I will give you lots of tips and tricks and techniques for working within the environment after having done it for so many years. But read through this section real carefully and learn about it. And then actually let's get down to the next little exercise and get this one completed as well. So go ahead and launch your Visual Studio if you haven't done that already. And then we're going to learn about how we can change the template settings here. And the reason that we're doing this is we want to make sure that you want to get this full view. Now, I'm noticing that this version of Visual Studio is probably a little bit different in this regard. Now, I notice that my website is still running, and you can see that it's monitoring the progress of the website. So I'm going to actually click these buttons up here. The first one is just to pause it from execution, but I'm going to hit the stop button so I can go back to development mode. All right, so the author wants us to check tools and settings, and if you start looking through here, you're probably going to say, oh my god, where is that? And you're going to find out that it's not there in this version. So that step for you is basically going to be irrelevant. It's only relevant for the Express Edition. So as part of this, when you're reading these instructions, I want you to be really careful about how you read them because the details are important. So the Express Edition is really meant for novice programmers and not really for the type of thing that we're teaching you. So step 2 is basically ignore at this point. All right, so we'll move on to the next one. We're going to now go to the dialog and create a new website. And right off the bat, we're going to see that, like we did last time, that doesn't exist in 2017. So I have my previous project open and I want to close this. I don't just want to click the X here. What happens when you do that is you're just closing the file. The project is still open over here. So what we need to do is close the whole project. And I want you to notice that projects are attached to what we call solutions. And solutions are basically pointer files that show you where all the assets for a project are. So if I want to actually close this, I need to come up to the File menu and choose Close Solution, and then that will close everything and pop you back over to the Start page. Now I'm going to come up to the File menu and choose New, and you're going to notice I do not have New Website. And I'm going to repeat this. If you have versions 2012, 2013, and 2015, you will see New Website, and that's the menu option you want to choose here to get the right template. Those of you using 2017, choose Project. All right. In the left-hand sidebar now, we want to make sure that we choose Visual C#, go to Web, then to Website, make sure it's expanded, and then choose ASP.NET Empty Website. Then we're going to wait there for the next instruction. All right. Notice that we also have some version differences here, and it says ensure that file system is chosen in the web drop-down location. We don't have that. They removed that from this version, and I think that was a smart move. All right. Next, it says right-click the new website in Solution Explorer. Oh, we have to click OK first. And we're not worried about naming it once again. We're just kind of doing it. So let's go ahead and just click OK. It's going to build out the website. Now, because this doesn't have a lot of pre-built components, you can see the folders that appeared on the left there are much more simplistic. And really, for some of you, you might even not be seeing all of these files. And I'm just trying to see here if I have my hidden thing on or not. Right, so I'm actually in a different view. So I have solutions in folders. You may have ended up in folder view, which is going to look like this. And there's nothing wrong with either one. But I'm going to stick with the solution view, which is the default. Okay, let's pop back over to the book and see what the next step is. Next, it says right-click the new website in Solution Explorer. Make sure you click the website and not the parent solution element. And so what they mean by that is that you're right-clicking here, okay, not up here, the website itself. All right, what they want us to do now is add a new item, and I'll show you how to do that. So we're going to right-click, add, right, and you see I got a different menu because I wasn't on the right item, so I'm going to click on website, add new item. So if you're not getting the right things on the screen, there's a reason for it. The book now wants us to select web form and type controls demo as the name. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Let's choose web form. I'm just going to highlight that in controls demo. Now you notice I deleted the file extension there. It doesn't matter. It will add it back in. So don't worry about that. It says you can leave everything else at the default settings, and the page should then open up in markup view after you click add. All right, so it creates the page, and there it is in the Solution Explorer. And notice that we have, for the most part, a basic HTML document. And notice also that there's this ASP code up at the top. And then on the right-hand side in the Solution Explorer, notice the fact that the Aspx file has a little expander and has another companion file that goes with it, which is the C# file that's attached to it. So that's a programming file. You can go ahead and click on it if you're curious. If you want to take a look, just give it a double click and you can see that there's programming code. In the next chapter, we will go in and I will start explaining how to work with that. But for right now, we can kind of ignore it, at least for the moment. All right, so they want us to switch the page over to design view. So let's do that. And the design view is a little button that sits right down here at the bottom. And you get a visual representation of the screen. So it's not really like a preview version like you might get in Dreamweaver or something, but it's a rough approximation which can help you accelerate some of your workflows. All right, next step that they want us to have here is to go to the toolbox, and it says if your toolbox is not open yet, open it. Now mine is already open because I was working with it last night. Yours may be collapsed in the side, so it might be sitting like up here somewhere sideways. And if it's not, then you can just come up here to the view menu and choose toolbox and it will pop up. All right, let's look at the next steps here and see what we need to do. All right, so now that we've got the toolbox open, you can also click this little pin, and then that pin will like lock it into position. Otherwise, you're going to be in the mode where you can pull it up, do what you need to do, and then after you've done it, it kind of pops back over. So if I'm working with the tools a lot, I like to pin it, but just know how to bring it up and how to work with that. All right, so the task that they want us to do is drag a couple of things over into this view. All right, so Let's find the first one. It says drag a text box and a button from the standard category of the toolbox into the dashed area in the design view. And you should get something like what they have. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and find a text box, and this is all in the standard section. So if your tools are looking like this, make sure you expand that first one. So then we're going to take a text box, we're going to drag it into that dashed box, and then we're going to, my suggestion is you right arrow, so use your arrow keys here so you get that cursor, you see the cursor flashing. When this is selected, I really can't drag another tool into it, which is our next step. So I want to hit that right arrow, or I could click with my mouse to the right of it to get that cursor flashing off to the side. Then I can go ahead and grab a button and drag and drop that in as well. Now they have it looking like this in here, and it's possible that the button, if it was like mine, ended up in the wrong spot. You can actually pick that up and drag and drop it and fix that, and I'm not really sure why it did that. It's probably treating it as a block level item, but it's not really that big of a deal. This is a sample application. We're not looking for perfection. Now, what they would like us to do, and is change the text on the button. So what we're going to do is on that button, we're going to actually right-click it and then choose Properties. Now those of you that have worked with Visual Studio before know that whenever you select an object, the Properties window automatically pops up down here. But just in case it doesn't, you can always do that right-click. Then the thing that they want us to change is the name, and they want us to switch this to Submit Information, and then press Enter to lock it in, and you can see how the button changes just like that. Now, we haven't really done anything fancy here, granted, but they do want us to check it out and run it, so go ahead and hit the play button. Let the application launch, and see how easily you've just created a text box and a button. Now what I like to do is, if you want to type some stuff in and hit the button, you notice it's not going to do a thing because we didn't program it to. But I'm going to close the browser and stop the application from running. But what I would like you to do if you get a chance is actually go ahead and look at the code page. And we're actually already on it, but we're in design view, so we can actually switch over to the source code and then take a look at what it created. So by dragging in a text box, it threw an ASP text box, and then dragging in a button, an ASP button. The reason this was appearing on the line below is because it was outside of the div, so I can actually move that, just drag and drop it, and now it'll be inside if I switch back to design view. Alright, well that completes that exercise, and I believe that is most of the exercises, if not all the exercises. I would encourage you to go through the rest of the chapter and read through some of these things on customizing things and moving things around, and then go through and try this exercise on your own. If you need guidance on this one, I think the pre-recorded video from last year will help to guide you, but this video will end here, and I wish you luck on customizing the IDE, and then move on to Chapter 2 and start working on that one.